This week in Texas politics included the tip-off of March Madness, and in politics we saw some slam dunks, some rebounds, and even a few bracket busters. Let's get the headlines now from our panel, and we'll start first with Brad Johnson with the Texan News. Brad, what's your headline?
Speakership Game of Thrones is on.
Brian Smith with St. Edward's University. Brian, what's your headline?
Out in the West Texas town of El Paso, there's trouble at the border.
And political analyst Mark Wiggins, what's your headline for the week?
So the Ides of March bring the first coup attempt in the Texas House.
Well, the Texas week started off with the new Texas immigration enforcement law, SB 4, getting the green light, and then a hard stop from the Supreme Court and then the Fifth Circuit of Appeals. Mark, what are you hearing about this legal whiplash that's been going on?
Rudy, I think this may ultimately head back to the Supreme Court. And then what happens is really anybody's guess. I mean, there's a mountain of precedent where the court has ruled that states can't enforce immigration law, but this court has definitely shown it doesn't really care that much about precedent. And what I think we see here is that SB 4 is part of a larger strategy among more conservative state legislatures that feel like there's a window with this court to overturn some of the established precedent that has irritated them over the years.
A little legal double dribbling going on. Brian, a constitutional law attorney, described it as unprecedented. Is it unprecedented?
Not necessarily. Mark was spot on because you have so much at play right now. And one is the precedence of Arizona versus the United States. You have more than a decade since that decision and a very different court that's moved to the right. We know that the court is not absolute and you can wait them out. They can reverse themselves. So I think they're just buying themselves more time. This actually helps out Texas, who really has no idea how they're going to implement this law. So this actually gives them more time to figure out how you're going to get this law, if it actually does go through all the legal hurdles, how are you going to get it to work?
Now, here in Austin, Governor Greg Abbott said Texas will continue to charge migrants who cross between ports of entry with trespass with or without SB 4. Brad, you were at that event when the governor said that he got a big response to that, right?
Yeah, he did, and he's seen as the face of this border response among Republicans across the entire country. Obviously, you have the battle in court going on. The jury's still out on that. How does that ultimately end up? And that's obviously more consequential. But throughout the last few months, and I'm sure continuing on this year, there's the fight in the court of public opinion. And I think the governor is absolutely winning that right now. We'll see if that changes or stays the same. But right now, he's on the front foot.
Yeah, that issue really wrapping up Thursday in El Paso, migrants overrunning the Texas National Guard. The New York Post posting images from that incident. And as that unrest was going on, President Biden was here in Texas, not to see the border, but to attend fundraisers in Dallas and Houston. You know, Mark, Biden is proving that Texas is a great ATM, even for Democrats who may not win the state race.
Yeah, I don't think Democrats have any illusions about flipping Texas for Biden, Rudy. But, you know, the dysfunction and the infighting within the state Republican Party has a lot of Democrats talking about making big gains down ballot in November. And the RPT chair stepping down is part and parcel to that. So, you know, I and other political professionals will be paying close attention to the succession battle at the state convention. And you can bet that the Democrats will be too.
Brian, you agree? Is this all about collecting money for that down ballot?
We know that Texas dollars look identical to California dollars, and parties are going to find it wherever they can. And any support that the national leadership can give, especially to those down ballot, low salience races, they're going to try to do. You're not going to flip Texas blue by starting at the top. You got to start at the bottom.
But Brad, you got to admit that's bad optics for President being in Texas during this craziness that's going on in El Paso.
Sure, it makes them have to answer some difficult questions, I'm sure. But overall, Texas is a cash cow and fundraising wise. They need to hit the industry here. But also, you know, they want to ensure that all red at the top of the ticket, other than the presidential race, is close. They need to be somewhat competitive to build upon, you know, what O'Rourke did in 18. You can't have Cruz just run away with it and think you're going to, you know, turn Texas blue anytime soon.
Well, Governor Greg Abbott also doubled down, cash in on his vengeance tour regarding school choice. He justified his efforts to unseat fellow Republicans by claiming polls show school voters support school choice. The problem is that those same polls show people don't like vouchers. There's certainly a big difference between the two. But Brian, it looks like Abbott is still winning this messaging war, right?
Right. There isn't support for specific vouchers in the aggregate, but the concept of school choice has more support. Abbott did a great job of endorsing and recruiting candidates who support his policy. And for him to get what he wants, he doesn't need a majority of Texans, just a majority of legislators. And he's going to have all fall to work with these new legislators and old legislators to get something that will pass.
But Mark, you can't ignore the polls. People don't, when they find out what vouchers are doing and what they won't do, that's got to factor into what happens in January when state lawmakers come back, right?
I think you make a really important point, Rudy. The idea that the primary showed support for vouchers is just objectively false. The voucher question on the Republican ballot did worse than it did last election cycle. It was one of the worst performing measures on the ballot, which typically passed by like 95%. And, while the voucher supporters spent $6 million attacking the anti-voucher Republicans, the attacks said nothing about vouchers. They were all lies about the incumbents' positions on border security. So, I mean, the idea that this election signaled any sort of mandate is a complete fabrication.
But Brad, I think the ice has been broken in school choice in some type of form, maybe universal school choice. That most likely is going to happen.
Yeah, whether it was there on the messaging front of the campaigns or not, the governor said he has 74 votes right now in the House to pass some form of school choice program. And that's not even including, you could peel off some of the current members who voted against with certain guardrails, but also throw in the runoffs. Who knows what happens there? And he's pretty close to a majority that he needs.
House Speaker Dade Phelan is among those House members being targeted because of vouchers and school choice, and Paxton supporters targeting him. Now he has a formal challenger for his position as Speaker, with Tom Oliverson from the Houston area announcing that he is throwing his hat into the ring. Oliverson is promising now that no more Democrat committee chairs. Brad, is this one of those times when a Phelan ally is a political Judas, or is he just kind of, doing a backup plan for when change does happen?
I think he sees a lane to run and he jumped first, and that kind of sets the baseline for all future Phelan challengers that jump into this race. If there are any, I'm sure there will be. But something to keep in mind is if they lock the Democrats out entirely, A, what incentive do they have to remain in Austin, or is there just a massive quorum break scenario on the horizon? And B, do they unite with a dozen or so Republicans to nominate a speaker of their own, like Joe Strauss did when he came to power? So things to keep in mind as we see these issues discussed.
We hear a lot of House Republicans always trashing Congress and the dysfunction in Congress, but now it seems like a lot of these House Republicans want to be like Congress and basically saying the majority party gets to select the speaker. Brian, that's got to be dangerous.
Yeah, they need to learn the lesson from the national GOP. That speaker battle in Congress was miserable for the party. If the Republicans here in Texas are strategic, they're going to coalesce behind one candidate because a weak and unpopular speaker gives the Democrats greater ability to stall legislation, possibly get some of their own legislation passed, or in a worst case scenario for the GOP, get one of their own as speakers. They have to be very careful here because they could be in the majority, but blow it.
And they could eventually be in the minority or not big majority, right, Mark? And then you're really in trouble.
Rudy, we got to remember the Texas House still has a speaker, and his name is Dade Phelan. He had a fundraiser yesterday that, by all accounts, was well attended by his colleagues. Of course, he has a tough runoff. But look, historically, people who put their first name or put their name in the hat first, they don't fare that well, in particular when there's still a sitting speaker. And the challenger in this case is pretty closely connected to the lieutenant governor. I think that doesn't escape notice from the House membership.
Yeah, the speaker pointed that out in a recent interview that he did this week. Now, on Capitol Hill, Texas Congressman Chip Roy spent the week blasting the new budget deal that just passed on Friday to avoid a government shutdown. That bill was fast-tracked with a whole lot of pork in it, a lot more pork than what you see in a South Austin barbecue joint. Roy seems to be stuck in the swamp, though, because he just can't get that message through. So, Mark, what's going on over there?
Well, Rudy, this bill is 70% defense spending, at a time when the world is a tinderbox and we all see it. It includes a 5% raise for service members. We know there are problems at the border. This would hire 2,000 Border Patrol agents. So, it's kind of must pass legislation, and it looks like it's going to pass. The irony here is that it's very similar to the deal that Kevin McCarthy struck right before he was ousted as Speaker.
Yeah, Brad, it must pass legislation, but it was just lit up like a Christmas tree with pork. Wow.
Welcome to the new reality, same as the old reality. We haven't passed a budget without a continuing resolution since the early 90s, I think. And this is just basically how the game is played now. We see this charade played every year. Just a question of whether we hit a shutdown or not.
Mark, will this cost, Mark, will this bring about another speaker change?
It very well could, under the rules of the House GOP, just one person can trigger that. And as of this morning, we were hearing that someone was attempting to do it. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene launched a missile at the sitting speaker. So who knows what could happen? But it's their rules.
Brian, would you be surprised if we get another speaker change out of this?
I'll tell you what, we're getting very close to an election, and the Republicans right now, they keep losing members because of resignations, because of people being expelled. The last thing they need to do is give up that majority, not by choice, but by their own hand. And what we're seeing is Chip Roy is actually finding his voice in Congress, and he's in a lot safer position than he was 4 years ago. So he can be one of those people to throw those bombs against his own party.
You agree, Brad? Repercussions coming?
Possible. I'm not sure the voters are really paying attention to what's going on in Congress, unless, of course, we hit a shutdown. That kind of changes a lot of things.
As I say, I think that's, Mark, don't you agree? That's the elephant in the room for the GOP up there in Congress, because they know that they can't get anything really ramrodded through on the Senate side. So was this just a white flag?
You can't shut down the government. It's bad no matter which party is in charge. Everyone takes the blame for government shutdown. And, when mail stops getting delivered and checks stop getting delivered to federal employees, who are having to pay rent and put food on the table, that's a bad deal all around. You have to avoid that.
Brian, do you agree? Are people really, does something like this carry over to November?
What will carry over is that the Republicans right now have some winning issues with immigration and inflation. The worst thing they can do is give an issue to the Democrats. President Biden will be happy to sign anything that will prevent a government shutdown and cast that blame on the GOP. And so if the Republicans want to play hardball, they have to be prepared for the repercussions. And in the summertime, not getting paid, having government shut down, having national parks closed is something voters would remember.
All right, let's wrap up this week in Texas politics with one word for the week, and we'll start off with Brad. What's your word?
Rat race.
Mark, what's your word?
Treachery.
Treachery, okay. And Brian, what's your word?
Calipari.
A reference to Kentucky going down. All right, and that wraps up our week in Texas politics.